Today, we're talking about a new national security threat, a shooting at the Super Bowl parade, status updates on former President Trump's trials, and other top news for Friday, February 16th. Stay informed while remaining focused on Christ with the pour over today. Here's the quote of the day. What one generation tolerates, the next generation will embrace. John Wesley. Let's get started with some espresso shots. It sounds like a bad 80s movie, but no, Russia really may be seeking to launch nuclear weapons into space. Wednesday, after the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee said he'd shared information concerning a serious national security threat with Congress, it was later revealed that the info was on Russian space weapons. Russia reportedly wants to use nukes against satellites, not Earth, potentially hampering both civilian and military communications. Such weapons would signal Russia's abandonment of a 1967 treaty banning all orbital weapons of mass destruction. Lawmakers confirmed there was no immediate threat, with Speaker Johnson saying, "Steady hands are at the wheel." The Kremlin dismissed the announcement as a malicious fabrication by the White House. Meanwhile, Russia's President Putin says he prefers President Biden over former President Trump, which Trump said is a great compliment. Here's a verse to consider when headlines read like science fiction. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commandments. He is not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. Psalm 112, 1 and 7. Details of the shooting at the Chiefs' victory parade continue to emerge. On Wednesday afternoon, an estimated 1 million fans gathered in downtown Kansas City to celebrate their team's repeat Super Bowl win. As the event wrapped up, gunshots rang out. A 43-year-old mother was killed and more than 20 people were shot, including 9 children, who are expected to recover. Police believe the shooting stemmed from a personal dispute that ended in gunfire, not terrorism. 3 suspects, including 2 juveniles, were detained after the incident. The more than 800 police on duty acted quickly, along with unarmed bystanders who helped tackle one possible suspect. Kansas City's mayor praised the first bystander's heroism, and Chiefs players are offering support to their community. President Biden said the shooting should shock and shame us into acting on gun legislation. As the shooting turned a day of celebration into a day of grieving, sin breaks and twists what God has made good. As you pray for the community, encourage others with the hope in the God who will one day undo the damage sin has done. Psalm 30, 11 and 12 says, "You turn my lament into dancing. You remove my sackcloth and clothe me with gladness, so that I can sing to you and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever." Former President Trump is hopping between the campaign trail to the courtroom. Here's where his biggest legal challenges stand. First, New York hush money. Yesterday, a state judge denied Trump's motion to dismiss charges of falsifying business records stemming from a $130,000 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, confirming the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president will begin on March 25th. Second, Mar-a-Lago classified documents. This state trial is currently scheduled for May, but is expected to be delayed. Third, D.C. election interference. This federal trial is frozen while Trump appeals his claim of presidential immunity to the Supreme Court. Fourth, Georgia election interference. A decision is expected shortly on whether Fani Willis, the district attorney leading the case, should be removed from the case. Willis is accused of having a financial and personal conflict of interest with her lead prosecutor. In this divisive political climate, followers of Christ have an opportunity to show that our ultimate allegiance is to Him. Imitating our just and merciful Father, root for justice while retaining love for all parties, both the accused and the accusers, desiring restoration, not revenge. Isaiah 30:18 says, "The Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore He will rise up to show you compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him.
What would you do if you were falsely accused of murder? For Hannah Overton, that question isn't hypothetical. Hannah was a regular mom of 4 in Texas when, out of the blue, she was falsely accused of murder. Hannah was shocked by the lies, and as a firm believer, she knew that God would come to her rescue and never let those rumors spread. But the exact opposite happened. Hannah eventually stood before a jury of her peers and heard them sentence her to life in prison. This was a terrible mistake. How could God have let her down? But Hannah would soon discover that God had a plan all of his own. Listen to Hannah's entire story on episode number 16 on the Compelled podcast, titled Falsely Accused of Murder and Sentenced to Life in Prison. Listen on your podcast app or at compelledpodcast.com.
In other brews, here's a rapid round of updates. What's an extra zero among friends? Lyft's CEO, David Risher, took the blame for the press release that erroneously said the rideshare company's margin expansion was 500 basis points, 5% growth, instead of 50, 0.5%. Oopsies. Shares soared 60% before the error was corrected. Meanwhile, Uber stock was up 14% after they announced their first ever share buyback. 10 civilians and 3 Hezbollah fighters were killed by Israeli Defense Force (IDF) strikes on Lebanese villages Wednesday. Israel was retaliating for a Hezbollah strike that killed a soldier on an IDF base. The same day, the Biden administration put an 18-month block on the deportation of Palestinians from the U.S., citing deteriorating conditions in Gaza. Former President Trump doubled down on saying he would not defend NATO nations that aren't meeting defense spending requirements. Trump had previously said he'd encourage Russia to do whatever to the 20 countries spending less than the required 2% of GDP on defense. The White House called his comments dumb, shameful, and dangerous. On the heels of hosting record-breaking Super Bowl audiences, Paramount Global, the parent company of CBS and Nickelodeon, is cutting 800 jobs, around 3% of its workforce, to execute strategic vision. Meanwhile, networking conglomerate Cisco Systems is cutting 4,000 jobs, 5% of its workforce, and decreasing annual revenue forecasts. Both companies saw shares fall with the announcements. Iowa's Caitlin Clark is elite. Last night, she broke the all-time NCAA women's scoring record at a sold-out home game against Michigan. Ticket prices averaged $394, a record for a women's basketball game, college or professional, with courtside tickets reaching $4,400. And that's all we have for today. Thanks so much for listening. If you're listening on the Apple Podcasts app, give us a 5-star rating and drop a review. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow and hit the notification bell to never miss a new episode. We appreciate your support and hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Most social media sells your data, peppers you with ads, and curates divisive content. Not Tuvu. Tuvu is wholesome social media built and moderated with the whole family in mind. Choose social media that uplifts rather than drains. Check out Tuvu, that's Tuvu, at the link in our show notes.